So today's episode is with Ed from Octopus. That's a really great episode.
Ed is fantastic at distilling things down into really simple terms and just that focus on simplicity. Keep it simple.
Yeah, totally agree, Aaron. Like, you guys know, I consume everything Ed posts. For any founders listening, like, Ed has posted some really good blogs about total addressable market and about sales funnels. And we actually unpack that in this episode. It's an extension to the blog, and it's a really great listen.
I'm really looking forward to what he said about losing product market fit.
Yeah.
He's so right that people find it and then lose it, but nobody's really gone deep into that losing of it. So I'm looking forward to that coming up.
And the other one was the tilt. So having a small TAM, but identifying the opportunity to tilt in the future.
Yeah. Look, let's stop screwing around and let the listeners get into it because this is a great one. Ed, I'm really excited for this episode. We've been wanting to get you on the podcast for ages. A, we really love the stuff you put out online, but B, we've actually spent quite a bit of time working together on a joint investment, and really great to have you here today.
Cheers. That feels like a lot of a pressure intro, that one. I already started slightly nervous that I'm going to mess up for you.
No, not at all. It's great to have you on, Ed.
What we'd really love to just start with is, how did you find your way into venture capital? Was it a linear thing where you woke up and said, I'm always going to be in VC, or did you accidentally get your way in?
Yeah, just at 8 years old, I just thought I want to be a B2B software investor and, put my sights on it. But no, like non-linear at all, a bit crazy. I think first and foremost, my parents are entrepreneurs. So both my parents, not particularly successful ones, but not unsuccessful ones, I would say. You know, they did well in their own little niches, but more like lifestyles type stuff. But I was always brought up around small business. So I couldn't really understand why anybody would want to work for a big company, because I was just like, what, don't you just want to control your own destiny? And I just love entrepreneurs. Like, I think it's amazing. Like when you guys sat around at a coffee table and said, hey, should we start this VC? What should we call it? How should it all fit together? And it's like, I just love that ideation stage where, people get together with nothing, and then all of a sudden becomes something, and then you take on Jack, and it's like, oh my God, that everyone's lives are affected. And I just think it's quite beautiful in a way. And to me, much more interesting than going to work for a blue chip. I completely went against my instincts and started at Rolls-Royce, which is like one of the UK's largest companies. As much as anything, because I was just curious to see why anyone would fucking do it. Which I lasted all of 9 months at, because I was just like, I just remember grey people, grey buildings. And I don't want to bad on Rolls-Royce or anything. I was in defence aerospace doing the fighter jet engines. So the cool bit was that you get all the fighter jets coming over the factory and zooming around and stuff. The really uncool bit was that it took 25 years to produce an engine. To develop it, it's like, the fruits of your labor would be like 25 years in the future. You just think, wow, that's a long time to wait. So it's a great company for the right people. I was commercial, I wasn't engineering. And then there was a startup, and I just jumped at the chance of joining a startup. I was employee number one, did that for 4 years. Learned loads of stuff about working in a startup, probably stuff that I didn't realize I'd learned until much, much later on in my career, much more later on into investing. I'm like, oh shit, actually that stuff that I learned back then was really useful. But a good friend of mine was an accountant at Ernst & Young, and he was talking about, like, he wanted to do a career change, and he was talking about venture capital, and I was like, oh, that sounds like what I want to do. That sounds really more interesting, but I'm not qualified for it. I don't have any real experience for it. And this is I've been doing it a while, so this is before the days. Now, if you've been an employee in a startup, that's exactly what the VC wants. Back then, it was like they just wanted investment bankers from Oxford. It's quite different. But I had a mate that worked in IT for Octopus, and so I went onto the fundraising floor. So I literally just made cold calls. It was brutal. But I think everyone should do this. I think maybe it's like national service. Everyone should have to work in sales for 2 years. Like, you're not allowed into a company unless you've done 2 years in sales, because you understand what a skill and how brutal that is. Anyway, worked really hard. Got to know Simon Rogerson, the chief executive of Octopus Group, quite well, and tried to show him that I was a bit more than just this, and that I could think of new ideas, and etc. And after about 18 months, somebody gave me a job as an administrator on the investment side of the business. Yeah, and I guess the rest is history. Over the last sort of 13 years, I've just worked from administrator to portfolio administrator to analyst, associate, investment manager, principal, etc. And I've invested in pretty much everything from sort of management buyouts through to sport, through to renewable energy. And then the last 7 years has been really focused on B2B software investing. Also 6 years been focused on B2B software investing. And we're at the sort of growth stage where companies have got proper revenue. I like investing in things where there's numbers. Otherwise, I just think everything's a good idea and just invest in everything. So I don't know how early stage people do it. I really don't. So yeah, it combines that kind of financial analytical skills and the entrepreneurial stuff that I enjoy.
That is awesome. I especially love the bit of mandatory sales experience. I think that's genius. I'm going to actually force that on my kids, I think.
Isn't it the case that there's X percentage of Church of the Latter-day Saints, Mormons, but in Fortune 500 companies, the percentage is way up, because if you've had to go and sell that door to door, there are some skills that you learn from doing that, which then just gets them more into the comfort zone of being able to sell a vision and a message?
I don't know a huge amount about the Mormons, Don. I'm not going to lie, but I wouldn't be surprised. I just think you haven't lived until you've made 30 cold calls in a day and no one's spoken to you. You know, that's resilience.
And then what I'm interested there is you obviously, it sounds like you started off probably not enjoying it. Did you end up enjoying it, or did you just learn some skills to cope to become better at it?
You mean the sales side?
Yeah.
I think I learned skills to cope, to get better at it. And I was pretty good, actually. I mean, I don't want to blow my own trumpet. I was pretty good, but I think mainly because I was so determined to get on the investment side. You know, I'd worked in a decent job at Rolls-Royce. The startup I was in was doing okay, and I was employee number one, so I sat on the leadership team and was dealing with FTSE 250 companies. And we did sales there as well. First employee, I was selling all the time. But it's different when you're doing fundraising. I mean, you guys are fundraisers, you know what it's like. The thing that clicked for me, being really organized is number one, like being very set, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But the other thing is having a reason to call, like a really specific reason to call. I got comfortable once I figured out that I just always needed to make sure that I had the reason to call them. You know, if you just call up and you're like, hey, I'm Ed from Octopus, would you like to invest in our funds? They're like, but if you're like, hey, I saw the article that you wrote on this, or if I saw that you did this over here, you make it personal to them, then actually the call is much easier. It's much easier to have that conversation. It's probably the right way to sell as well, because you know who you're selling to. And I think you just, at the end of it, you just get a bit numb to it, don't you? After a while, you're just like, eh. I think Chris Hewlett, one of the co-founders of Octopus, they founded Octopus themselves, and they just called from the Yellow Pages. So Yellow Pages, for those of a certain age, will know what it is. But the Yellow Pages, before the internet, you had a big book of all the numbers that all these companies, and they literally just called numbers in the Yellow Pages, one after the other, saying, hey, would you like to invest in your fund management company? And Chris Hewlett says he made one call and somebody said, yeah, I did receive your business plan. It's currently in the shredder. It was like, how do you then motivate yourself to make the next phone call? Hey, did you put my business plan in the shredder? If not, anyway, more for that person. Those shares are probably worth about £1 billion now. So
that level of resilience in your evaluation of deals, is there a way that you found a way to test for some of that resilience, or the fact that you're investing later and they've got real revenue, that probably tells you they've got enough to achieve greatness?
No, I think it's what's really important with it, and what I've learned about it is that we invest at the intersection where you go from founder-led sales to team-led sales. You get the founder, and the founder, we've got one ourselves, haven't we? He's like full of energy, full of charisma. He's going to like break down walls. He's not going to care if his business plan's in the shredder. He is going to carry on, and he just thinks no matter what the product is, it's going to sell itself, and as I said, he'll do whatever it takes. And then all of a sudden, the company gets too big to make every sale, or her to make every sale, and they can't just break down the walls in the same way. And they go, what we'll do is we'll hire some salespeople. And you hire some salespeople, but they're less motivated than you. Then they don't have the same stake as you in the business. And you're like, hey, just go and sell stuff. And they're like, what do we do? And you're like, well, sell the product. And like I did, I've been selling it for ages. And they fail because we know that sales is really hard. And if you don't have very clear direction and you don't have a repeatable process, all that you end up in is they're like cold calling. Can you imagine like you're a 22-year-old out of university and you're like, hey, call all these people. You're like, oh my God, this is so painful. Call FTSE 250 board members and see if they want to sign up to the new software. It's like, it's soul destroying, and we've done it. So I think you have a respect for not necessarily the founder, but for the people that they're then going to hire. And so for me, it's so important that the founder doesn't let go of the sales engine too quickly, and then really focuses on how can they make it repeatable. I personally have a theory that most salespeople can be good salespeople if they have good leads, so they have stuff coming in at the top of the funnel, they understand why they're calling, and they're trained well. Like, it's not rocket science, but actually what happens is, at our stage, is they have none of those things. leads, marketing and sales are generally disjointed. So marketing's over there, like running events that doesn't produce any leads over this side of the business for the sales engine. The funnel metrics aren't really understood. And so what instead happens is the founder just keeps firing the salespeople and saying that they're no good and that they need to get more salespeople, different salespeople. Oh, sales are down, get more salespeople. So no, probably only need one or two salespeople. And what you need is a really good machine to drive the sales. So that, I think it gives me not necessarily on the founder side, but certainly on the people they're employing, I think it gives me a respect for how hard that job is, especially when it's unstructured.
Are there factors that you look at, like coming into an investment, that you look at with the founding team to pick up any signals if they're going to be able to navigate that better than others? Are there any tests that you can run over a team, or is it about the systems, the processes, the structures that they put in place afterwards?
Yeah, because of the intersection at where we invest, often those structures aren't in place. And so if we said, oh, unless you've got the structures all sorted, we're not going to invest, we've basically never invested in anything. The way that we've handled this and the way that we've changed our methodology, we used to do quite a lot of backward-looking diligence. So our diligence would all be about what has happened. Let's talk to the old customers and see if they love the product. Oh yeah, they always love the product because you always only put into the customers that love the product. And we scrapped a lot of that methodology and went, okay, we're going to build a revenue academy, work with some really good people, and say actually as part of our investment, we want to put you through our revenue academy, which is actually, before we spend any of our money, before we spend the money that we invest in you, before you go ahead and plunge it all into leaflets at an event or whatever, we want you to work with our consultant to build the machine. And once the machine is built, we can then test it, trial it, and test it and trial it. And the mistake that I think we made maybe a few years back was just giving money to founders and allowing them to just hire big sales teams. And it was just a nightmare because they think that they're doing the right thing. Obviously, more salespeople, more sales come in, but actually the opposite happens. You hire more salespeople, there's no real communication, they don't know what they're selling, there's a lot of cross wires, the founder gets dragged into conversations, you end up in this like horrible world of go-to-market consultants repositioning the company 5 times and redoing the website and branding. It's just like at the same time you're burning shitloads of money and everyone's panicking. So now here's the funding, don't do anything, go through the academy, test the engine. Let's see what works. Let's make sure we've got that repeatable process. And then as that repeatable process comes on, now put more money into leads. When there's so many leads that the salespeople cannot cope with them, with the amount of volume, you can then add a salesperson. Because actually that's quite a fun environment to work at. So if you're a salesperson and there's just so much business coming your way, you're like, amazing. The worst place is where no leads are coming through and you're being asked why you haven't made enough calls today. It's like, there wasn't enough, I don't know, meat in the meat machine to make the sausages. So yeah, I think we really reversed engineered our diligence a little bit and made it much more forward-looking and just started working with some really good people that understand the funnel metrics in the machine.
I absolutely love that. I love that concept of the academy.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be complex. Like I don't want it to be like sound like a training camp. And actually, some companies may already be there. Some companies they know all the funnel metrics, they know all the conversion ratios, they have all that stuff in place. But to be honest, most don't. Like most of the majority don't.
And I guess in that engagement, you'll see how the founders take the feedback, able to change, engage in the frameworks and the tools, and that in itself is going to have incredible informational value.
Yeah, and that is a really hard thing to judge. Every single VC, I think it's really cliche. Every single VC is like, what's the most important thing? The founders, and founders. And you go on any VC's website, it's like we are the VC that backs founders more than any other founder-led VC type thing. And I'm just like, everyone thinks it's important. But I have a real problem with sitting in front of somebody for an hour or two and then trying to make judgments about them and who they're going to be. Like, I don't know. I find that really weird. I don't like to judge my friends. I don't like to judge people. But yet I'm being asked to decide whether this founder is a good egg and is going to listen and etc. And if I look at the best founders that I've worked with, the best founder I've worked with, speaking to him yesterday, I mean, he is absolutely nothing. There's nothing about him. And I'm sure Alistair, if you're listening, he won't be listening. But if he was listening, I'd say, Alistair, like nothing about you reeks founder. He's a guy from the north of England. He's simple in his approach, etc., etc. But he has been clinical in the way he's executed. He said, I'm going to do this, and he's done it. I think you guys are saying like the value of actually doing what you say you're going to do. That is a guy that does exactly what he says he's going to do, and he doesn't spend money unless he needs to, unless there's a real purpose to it. And so I'm sure if you did the psychometric testing, he'd immediately fail on it of what a founder looks like. So I have for me, it's about, do I think they're listening? Do they think truly listening, and are they an arsehole? Because ultimately they might be a successful arsehole, but life's too short to deal with people you don't want to deal with for 5-6 years at a time.
So true. We have a avoid even the successful asshole policy. But yeah, it's a really tough one, isn't it? Getting to know a human, and it's only typically in the times when it's gone really to the shit, or otherwise really successful the other way, that you actually see a lot of those values and characteristics come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people that I think wouldn't take none of my advice have lapped it up and taken all of it, and then I struggle with that because I'm like, who am I to advise them necessarily, other than I've seen hundreds of companies, and so I guess that gives me some insight into the ones that do well and the ones that don't. But that human interaction, I just think it's such an overplayed thing in VC. This idea that we as VCs are somehow these golden judges of character.
If you had gone straight from Rolls-Royce corporate into VC, would you be approaching anything differently? Was there stuff in the startup that was just so important to your life as a VC?
I think the real understanding of product market fit and simplicity. So the startup I got to was profitable in the end. It was doing, I don't know, over $1 million in revenue, but we could never really scale past the $1 million in revenue. And I think partly with that was because the proposition was just complicated. It was overcomplicated, and it wasn't really clear how much of a problem that we're solving. Actually, that's probably not true. I think the problem that we're solving, which is around like how engineering companies deal with aging populations, because obviously all these engineering companies now are getting really old. Everyone's really old at them. And as soon as you've got all these like nuclear power plants like being manned by people who are all about to retire. That's quite scary. It's quite a scary proposition. And I think we really understood that problem. But I think what happened is we didn't focus enough on making the solution easy enough to buy, to really scale quick enough. So our solution to their problem wasn't good enough. It was like, hey, we'll come in and fix it for you with, here's a kimono, look at all these things that we could do. And people are like, oh, this feels really hard to buy. Some people did buy it, and some people were really pleased with the product and what we did. And if I look at the companies that struggle now in the portfolio, it's often the ones where they tell me what their solution is about 1,000 times, and I still don't really understand it. So the simplicity of message and being easy to understand, I think, become really important. But in all honesty, if I look at my learnings from there versus my learnings from when I worked in sales, I think probably the year and a half I did on the phones trying to fundraise and talk to is probably more useful, if I'm honest, because I think because of the intersection in which I invest, that's such a fundamental piece of it. So you take the product market fit part of it and the simplicity of message and focus of message, get that right, but then also making sure we have that repeatable sales process to feed the funnel. Those two bits of experience together, I'd say, is probably equally as important.
And what about your experience at Rolls-Royce? Does that, I know it helped you find VC ultimately, but anything that you learned from there that you apply as an investor now?
Yeah, my character would never be suited to working in FTSE 250 companies. I think that's a massive head case for them, because I think when you get into those kind of old, especially like British corporate culture, it used to be a public company. It moved at glacial pace for me. So did I have any learnings from there? Honestly, probably not. I learned more from my mum and dad and seeing them run their businesses. I was doing my dad's cash flows and accounts at age 12. So like that. Really understanding my dad hammering the importance of cash flow down my throat and all this sort of stuff. I learned a lot more from that than I did from Rolls-Royce.
Yeah.
Ed, just to follow on about your time in a startup and working at Octopus, I'd love to know, in your view, what are the dynamics of a good B2B software company?
Oh, what are the dynamics of a good B2B software company? I'm surprised at how complicated people make business. Just generally, I'm surprised at how the people are looking for the secret sauce, the secret solution. I'm not sure it changes between B2B software than it does any other company. I think that the most important thing is you understand what the problem is that you're solving for, and you understand why your solution is significantly better than what's out there to solve that problem. That's fundamental. And it's amazing how many people have a solution that looks for a problem because they're really interested in the solution. I was talking to one yesterday, we love AI and we've been AI engineers, and so we just want to do something in AI, and we're starting an AI company. I'm like, what? So you don't even know what the problem is you're solving? No, but we've got this whizzy bit of technology. I thought, oh my God, that blows my mind. I think specifically in B2B software, though, to good things in there, number one is that you have to have a scalable product. And what I mean by that is it's so easy with B2B software is you develop the first B2B software bit. And then we do a widget that helps people do expenses. And we get that widget that helps people do expenses, and people start buying it. And then we get a big customer that comes in and says, hey, actually, as well as doing expenses, it also needs to be doing invoicing. or something like that. And also, so we build another module over here. And then somebody else says, can you build a HR tool into it? So we build another module over here. And very early on, we're maybe now at £1-2 million revenues, and we have 5 different modules that are all doing slightly different things for 1 or 2 big customers. And yes, it's great to have got that revenue in, but you've got an absolute Frankenstein of a product. And that, I think, that's really problematic. And I see that all the time. I'm going to do just a little bit self-promotion. I'm doing a blog about losing product market fit. I'm writing a blog at the moment about not finding product market fit, but losing product market fit. Because I think in B2B software, especially, what happens is people get product market fit, and then they build the Frankenstein, and then they lose product market fit. And you're like, no, just be absolutely ruthless in your product and focusing down on what your problem solution is, and don't then get trapped by building software basically for other companies. So I'd say that number one. And then number two is churn. I think that I'm very skeptical of companies that have significant churn, even if they're selling lots of their product. So you cannot sell your way out of churn. Is really important. If you are churning lots of customers, if your gross revenue retention is down at 70%, then stop selling, fix your product, and then start selling again. And I just have a complete aversion to anything that's got high churn. I'd say they're probably the 2 big things.
Where do you think, in your example of the Frankenstein, they started with a module, they got some customers, there's almost like a fork in the road. I'll continue to find more customers that like what I've built and have an easier life, but they just often want to add the modules or make it Frankenstein. Is that just the entrepreneurial impulse that more is better, or do you have any other view of why they end up going down that and then screwing themselves over and losing product market fit?
They do, it's because of money. Okay, so like you guys try it. Hey, guys, I'm a Singaporean family office, and you guys have done an amazing job with Tribe at being that VC that's going to help you get to US and UK. But what I'd really love you to do is also give you a $20 million to like launch a Australia to China fund. And you guys, the 3 of you, got to sit there around the table and go, are we turning down Ed's $20 million to move to China? It's like shit. And then you do it, and you're actually quite successful. And then somebody else says, I think an African impact fund. You guys are so good at that. And so you start doing African impact funds before you know it. And I know Jack is spending all his time in Cape Town because it's cool there. And then there's the little people in the UK being like, hey, you guys, you said you'd help me. You said you'd help me launch in the UK. It's like, yeah, but they're paying me $20 million China. And then all of a sudden you can't scale the business. You can't scale Tribe because you've lost what it means to be Tribe. You've lost the vision that you guys set out. But it's a brave person that turns around and says, we'll turn down the $20 million from China. So these are not easy decisions. And I think that's what happens. A big corporate customer, you're selling 50 grand ACV licenses to people that are enjoying your product. And then someone says, I'll give you $500,000 to build 3 new modules that I need for my business. And you're like, $500,000, wow, 10 times what our average customer pays. And you point the resource at that. And then all of a sudden you've got a team that's basically servicing this big corporate who is a much better buyer than you. So he's completely screwed you. You've had to hire an entire development team to service that $500,000 that you've just won. And then the rest of the business is no longer scalable because you're completely distracted from that. There's no repeatable process. And it becomes really hard. So you have to, and it's a very disciplined entrepreneur that turns around and says, I'm going to turn down the $20 billion from China or the $500,000 new corporate client.
Yeah, and I guess the other challenge is, because thinking of founders who've been in that situation, they often describe it as, this is likely one of many more, and this is a whole new market for us that we could be chasing.
Oh, yeah.
How do they find conviction in which is their TAM? How do they make that decision?
That's the problem, isn't it? You can convince yourself of anything. I mean, as investors, you know that. It's like people, if you've got money burning a hole in your pocket and you're an investor in your fund and you've got to make that last investment, it's amazing how your risk appetite changes. I always say as an investor that like the worst thing is having too much money. People think that you don't have enough money. That's the real problem. And it is a real problem because you don't have a job. But aside from that, having too much money is actually also as problematic and can in the long term be worse because you start to make poor decisions. So as an aside, I think you have to, again, just be really disciplined. If you are going to go for that big corporate, are we building something that will then scale and be repeatable? And how many humans does it need to do it as well? Like, it's like we just want a widget and you can say, okay, well, that widget is the development team's time and we can put that within the SaaS product. That means that everyone else can get access to it. And yeah, it might be the right decision to make it. But if you're going to have to hire a team of 5 consultants to sit on that development team and get all the product requirements, and I think you turn down the $500,000. That's the truth, because otherwise you lose product market fit and you then have a business that's not scalable. I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to do it.
I think the people that are brave enough to do it are the ones that have done it in the past and felt the pain of what we're describing here. I think it's almost next to impossible for a lot of entrepreneurs, for a third party, an investor or anyone, to explain to them how a world looks without them experiencing it first. Like, it's just...
Yeah, I mean, I have a company, and I think there's this tipping point around about $4 million, $5 million, where the pain of doing it really kicks in. Do you know what I mean? So like you get away with it at $1-2 million, everyone feels good, and then you get $3 million, and I've got a company. I don't know if I should admit this. I've got a company that's doing $7 million, $8 million, but it's got 10 instances of its software. It's bought in knowing it was a problem. We thought it was going to be an easy problem to fix. And it was part of the kind of rationale, if we can fix this 10 instances of the software, then we can make it more scalable. Transpires that they've got some really big customers that love their instance of the software and they don't want to move on to a more unified platform. It's hush it. And now each of those big customers have got a team just to maintain their instance of the software, which are all going off in different directions. I think that's when you realize you've really made a mess of this. That's when you've lost product market fit and you're now in a horrible situation where you can't scale.
So just to segue to another thing that we often see founders get wrong is total addressable market. And Ed, I know you're quite vocal on this, and I've preached this internally, so I would love to hear it from you.
Yeah, so TAM's a weird one. My obsession with TAM got started. My obsession with TAM actually got started the reverse way around, which was that I didn't like the way that other investors were thinking about TAM, because I was thinking it felt really binary. An investor would be like, oh, the TAM's not big enough. And I'd be like, hang on a sec, yeah, the TAM today isn't big enough, but actually I came up with this concept of tilt. I think I did. I can't, it's one of these things, it's probably in a book somewhere that I read, but I can't find it. So I'm now just claiming it as my own. And I'm hoping that some business school picks it up, and one day I'll be referenced as the man that invented tilt, even though I'm not sure I did. But anyway, I came up with this idea of tilt. It's like a shit pivot. But the idea of tilt being that, like, how easy is it for this business to change, to expand its market, tilt into other areas? And so, like, for example, if you looked at something like, and Amazon's a great example of this, Amazon started as an online bookseller. Okay, so if you went, actually, the market for online books is pretty small. Let's not invest in Amazon. In retrospect, you'd look pretty stupid. So it's how easy is it for Amazon to tilt into other things? Okay, if you're selling books online, you probably sell CDs. You could probably sell, I don't know, greeting cards or whatever. It's like, it becomes very easy to see how Amazon, once successful in books, can then tilt into everything else, which obviously it has done. And I'm an amazing hindsight investor. But the same thing goes for Facebook. Like, oh, Facebook is there for the university students. Yeah, but if it opens itself up, it's not a hard, you don't have to change the technology. I think there's kind of some rules to tilt of like how easy it would be to tilt into different areas. Is the technology able to adapt quickly? Culturally, does it make sense? If you're an ESG platform for renewable energy, tilting into the oil industry is probably not going to be an easy tilt. And then your sales lines, how easy is it to sell? Again, Amazon was selling books and CDs through exactly the same channel, so it was a very easy tilt. If you're doing large enterprise contracts and you all of a sudden decide to go to SMEs, that's a completely different change. So there's lots of parts to how easy that tilt is, but I do think investors need to work harder at thinking about actually how easy is it for these markets to expand. But then as I got into it and looked at pitch decks over and over again, you just realize how bad people do TAM, how bad. But I put the blame on investors, not entrepreneurs. Because, like, number one thing is founders. Like, we love founders. We always want to invest in founders. Okay, everyone does that. Next thing is the market's got to be big enough. That's the next thing the investor says. It's okay. So number two, the investors told me the market has to be massive, so I'm just going to come up with a stupid number. I'm going to find the biggest number that I possibly can and then just say we need 1% of it. Even though what I do is a tiny piece of that huge market and I can never move into anything else. I had a company that was trying to tackle food waste through an app for supermarkets. And they were like, yeah, our market size is $1 trillion because that's the food waste problem in the world. I'm like, what do you do? We're an app for supermarkets. Okay, how many supermarkets are there in the UK? 10. And how much are you selling the app for? It's 100,000. I'm like, okay, your market is 10 times 100,000. It's 1 million. It's not 1 trillion. Your market size is 1 million, and that's if you get every single supermarket. And you can see the mind being like, that's not a very big number. And then their entire business model is shot to bits. Yeah, ultimately for founders, I try and hammer down the message that it's your market, your price, you multiply those two things together, that's your market size. And it's either the most important question or it's either the least important question. Because if the market is massive, it's really obvious and everyone's fine. If you're doing something quite nichey that I don't really understand, if you're like an app for piano tuning or something, then I don't know how many piano tuning app sales there could be. So you're going to have to educate me. You're going to have to get the data to say, actually, this is the number of people that play pianos. This is what I'm going to sell my app for. And this is where the market is. And that'd be a good example of tilt. And once we've done pianos, we're going to do guitars. And once we've done guitars, we're going to do, that would be an easy example of where you could start off by saying, piano tuning app, price of the app. Here it is. This is my market size today. But actually, these are all the other areas that I can tilt into in the future. And what the way I like to see it is that first, today, and then the future possibilities underneath, supported by data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I've definitely taken it on board, Ed. And it's just like for myself, it's a like really easy filter now to then do a bottom up TAM, quick assessment to whether or not we can actually see a return. But I love when we see a founder who's actually given it some thought and really understands how big their market is in terms of a customer. And I really dislike when they just give you the top down valuation of the sector. And it wasn't until I read your blog that it just was super clear. And yeah, I forwarded on that many times. So a lot of people in Aussie have read it.
Cheers, mate. I appreciate it. That does my ego a world of good. So thank you for that. I have a big problem with the top-down market sizing is good for one thing, and that's to sense check the bottom up. Nothing else. That's the only reason why you do top-down market size. And I think the thing here is as well, like for the entrepreneur, you do bottom up, and actually the market size isn't that big. That doesn't make your business bad. It just makes it non-VC backable. And that's not a bad thing. Like my wife is a private chef. She runs high dining supper clubs, 10-course taster menus. They're incredible, absolutely phenomenal. We're sold out through the summer. It's amazing. It's not scalable. It's not a VC backable, although I have had to back it. But like, you know, that's perfect. That's back it usually through childcare more than anything else. But it's an amazing business, but it's just, and it's fine that it's not VC backable. It doesn't need to be. Now, if she'd have gone, my market size is the entire market for private chefs, it would have been a nonsense. Because it's not. Because without her, there is no business.
I think that's a really good point that we're VCs and this is a VC podcast, but certainly in our market, people starting businesses, some of them believe unless they can get VC capital, they don't fulfill some, I've got a good business. Actually, my argument would be if you can stay the hell away from us and build a great business without us, your life's going to be probably better.
Yeah. The book Lost and Founder, the Moz story, it's a really good one about this, where he reflects on his time and realizes that he'd probably been better without VC capital and he'd been wealthier. Talking to a good friend of ours, a guy called Rupert Nabarro. He built the first commercial property index, and he was talking about how he got funded. And he got funded with £500,000 from his first customers. Never took another penny of funding because there wasn't any funding available at the time, and nobody knew what commercial property index was back in the early 90s. And so he just built it. And it's fair to say he's a very wealthy man now, having sold it for a lot of money, but purely through organic growth and just, careful, considered, didn't need to blitz scale. And I think, you got to remember that you got a 50% of a 20 million pound company, you've got a lot more money than if you've got 2% of a 200 million pound company. So isn't that what's important at the end of the day? I don't know. It depends what your goals are, I guess. But
I think you make a really good point, Ed, about how that's been driven by investors, though. We had a company come to us recently, and I've known the founder for a while, and he has a really good fundamental business. It'll be a great business for him, but he's shoehorning it in to be something more scalable. He's taking the advice from VCs on different markets, but also expanding into different sectors. And my view is it's almost going to ruin this otherwise perfectly good business. And so giving the founder that advice and saying, actually, don't take our money, go and restructure this and make this into what it can be, which is a fantastic business for him and his family. But I feel talking to him about it, there was definitely this sense it's not big enough for venture, it's not big enough for angels. We're being encouraged to go down this path. I think you're right about it being driven by the investor side a lot.
Yeah, and I think us investors have that responsibility as well, just to go, it's a good thing to turn around to the founder and say, hey, look, you know what, you're building a great business here. You don't really need us. Graft a little bit harder. We come with all sorts of problems and annoyances, and you're doing all the right things.
Yeah,
I agree.
I chat with a founder a couple of weeks ago. I'd known him from somewhere else, and I said, mate, to be honest, you scare the shit out of me. He's like, why? And I'm like, this just the moving pieces and the size of everything. And he said, you VC pricks are just so hard. Like, if I go in small and focus, it's not big enough. If I go in too big, it's too big. And I said, yeah, this is one of those difficult things of finding that line.
And I think that's a really good point, because my heart always sinks when you hear that. It's like when you're being asked when somebody is trying to explain how they've built their business around what a VC wants, that my heart sinks. I'm like, no, don't build it around me. Do that. Build the business really well, and then I'll decide if it's the right one for us. But if you start to try and reverse engineer your business into ours. It's like the old tail wagging the dog. It's the wrong way. That's the wrong way around. That's really the wrong way around. Prepare the information such that the VC understands what you do and all the rest of it, but ultimately build your business for you, not for us.
Yeah, and another little example, especially in angel meetings that I've been in, there's sort of two parts of the room. If the founder has an exit slide, this is how the sell will happen on the return. Half the room goes, they're not concentrating on building a great business, and they're only doing it for the money. And if they don't put it in, the other half of the room goes, they have no respect for my money, and they don't know how I'm going to get a return. It can be a bit
We're a horrible bunch, aren't we?
That's clearly what we're trying to communicate. Now, you've spent a lot of time on TAM, and I think you've done a great service to founders and investors around the world with the articles that you put out. One that we also really latched onto was you pointing out the fact that go-to-market seems to have taken on this whole entire different life and is very much confused. And the old funnel that had some beautiful simplicity to it seems to have been kicked out the door. Can you give the listeners your view of go-to-market and funnel and how those two things interact or don't?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely knew I made it when I was quoted on the Tribe podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, I was like losing my mind listening to it. I think, okay, this is it. I've finally got
brand damage. Oh my gosh, the brand damage is my name being used in that podcast.
No, I was like, I finally made it. This is the big time. This is what it feels like. People are going to stop me in the streets now. I think this started because, I don't know about you guys, but I would say on average, I get one email from a go-to-market expert every other day on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, hey, I was the vice president of widgets at Oracle sales, and now I've decided to become a go-to-market consultant. And I was just like, it's weird because I never get anybody like contacting me going, I've fixed 8 companies that are in the pile of shit. Do you need any help? So they'd be like, yes, I do. I definitely need help with that. So everyone wants to be a go-to-market consultant on the rocket ship that's going off. And when you talk to these people, quite often it's, okay, the first thing they do is, this is our diagram. And everybody has their own diagram of what the go-to-market strategy looks like. And it's got like branding and positioning and ICPs and pricing.
Aaron, hide the diagram. Hide our diagram.
Just Google, I generally do this, Google go-to-market diagram. And you will see thousands of different versions of go-to-market diagrams. And they all say the same thing in slightly different organized boxes. And you do the 3-month journey with the go-to-market consultant of talking to your customers and doing this and doing that. And then at the end of it, you get a report that it's like, I don't know, maybe because I was feeling a bit old and old school. I was like, this is all bullshit. I'm not saying all those things aren't important, and I'm not knocking your diagrams on. I'm not. But I just like...
We've got colours, Ed. There's different colours.
Okay, cool. Do you watch Silicon Valley on HBO?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this podcast, just stop listening to this podcast and spend your time watching Silicon Valley HBO, because it's brilliant, and B, you'll learn more. But there's a great bit where they talk about the conjoined triangles of success. Yes. And he comes up with his conjoined triangle, and they're like, it means nothing. And I just thought, oh my God, I've seen so many conjoined triangles of success so in my life. And I was like, my simple brain is like, isn't this quite simple? And weirdly, in all these diagrams, by the way, the pipeline or funnel metrics are always like eight boxes down to the right in a little square. And I'm like, no, the whole of business is one big sausage machine. All businesses are effectively a sausage machine. It's what comes in at the top, your leads from marketing, the machine, what you do with it in the middle, and then the sales that come out. And if you know that journey, and I can sit down with you in an hour and a piece of paper and be like, okay, how many leads did you get this month, next month, da-da-da-da-da? What's your conversion rate from MQLs to SQLs, then from SQLs to proposals, from proposals to contracting, and I can write down the rough conversion metrics and see what comes out the other end. And I can tell you straight away where your problem are. I don't need to do a big kind of like 100 interviews with all the staff and all the customers first. That will tell me. If there's not enough MQLs coming in, your problem is at the top of the funnel. So don't hire any more salespeople. That's the first rule, is do not hire any more salespeople. Because if the leads aren't coming in, like we talked about earlier, all that's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of salespeople twiddling their thumbs and feeling like they're doing a terrible job. And that's when the CEO starts to change all the salespeople time and time again. Actually, the problem is the top of the funnel, which is the MQLs. And actually, the number of MQLs and leads that need to come in is always way bigger than people realize. When they look at their conversion rates, and they look at what their forecasts are, they're like, oh my God, that's a bloody scary number. And not enough, and in our intersection, not enough work is done understanding that. And then you go to marketing, like, okay, well, how are we going out there? How are we generating leads? And you become, if you really focus on that, you become much more focused on actually where to spend your marketing dollars. And you probably double down on a marketing hire that's really understood that rather than further down the funnel. And what I find with people at our intersection is they always focus down the funnel. They always miss the top of it. And then you look at the sausage machine. If you're losing loads of customers between SQL and proposal, say, you know that there's something wrong with the way in which you're proposing your product. Like, the biggest reason people don't buy B2B software is apathy. That is the number. It's not competitors. It's because actually, usually the ticket value is quite a lot. Usually people have got another job to do. And to put their neck on the line to actually buy the software takes quite a lot. If you're already succeeding and you're doing okay, apathy is going to take over and you're just going to carry on doing what you've always been doing. So you'll see that from the conversion between SQL and proposal and contracting. And then you'll see what comes out. And, you know, the worst thing is that I say this to people and then they say, oh, this is our weighted pipeline. I'm like, oh, not a fucking weighted pipeline, please. Because it's what happens is you get like all these leads that came in like 9 months ago that are right at the top of the funnel that no one's talked to for 6 months. But they're usually big numbers. They're always big numbers. I don't want to take them out. And then they apply like a 2% number. I don't know why it's always 2%, but it's always 2%. You know, 2% is a huge top of the funnel that's not moved. And they're like, yeah, so we're happy we've got pipeline coverage. And it's like, that doesn't tell you anything because those things aren't moving. Get rid of all the crap from your funnel as soon as you possibly can. And ultimately, the point you want to get to is that from how many MQLs are coming in each month, what your sales are going to be in 6 months' time. For example, it depends what your funnel metrics are and how they look. And actually, if you've had a really good month in sales, but your MQLs are down by 50%, that's when the board should be freaking. That's what the board should be focusing on, not what's coming out the end, the sales. That should just be formulaic. You should be focusing on, oh my God, why is the leads dropped off a cliff? Have you ever been in a board meeting where, like, I don't know, sales are really good that month, but everyone's freaking out over the MQLs? It just doesn't happen, but it should do. That's what people should be focused on because that's the bit you can really start to control.
So there's a certain board that I observe on that is going to be sent this part of the podcast.
So the way I view the sales funnel is it's an accountability and an evaluation tool. And I agree with your comments, Ed. Like, people don't like to use the sales funnel because they don't want to admit and face actually how bad it's looking. As a VC, I can't evaluate it if I can't see what the funnel's like. So I just think at the core, it's an accountability issue. And at Tribe, we don't want to try and determine what the go-to-market is. Like, it's up to the founder to set the strategy, but then we want to use some type of an accountability tool to then evaluate it, whether or not it's working. And that's something that's been useful is using the sales funnel.
Cheers, mate. Jack's like my biggest fan. This is awesome. It's like...
You get talked about a lot, Ed.
I know. Like, I've never had one before. This is cool. This is because I said you look like Jason Statham.
Who was the other person someone said you look like, Jack?
I can't remember, but it was on the YouTube comment. What was it?
Wasn't it Tom Brady, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Tom Brady,
When Jack had hair, on one of our YouTube videos, someone's gone in there and says, it looks like Tom Brady's giving advice or something.
I can see that. That's on your point. Just to get back to the serious stuff, I think the point that Jack makes is the one that I think is the real killer, is that the reason why people don't look at funnel metrics a lot of the time is because when they do, it's bloody scary. It's, oh my God, to hit our targets, if this is what our conversion rates are, etc., we're going to be a million miles off. And when I've done this, and actually, do you know what? I would say a lot of founders have embraced that blog around funnel metrics, and it's given them some clarity, actually. Again, not trying to blow my own trumpet, but I think that it did resonate with some. And they've completely adjusted how they're looking at future sales because they're like, having done this and really focused on it now, I can see that we're never going to get to that end number because there's just not come enough at the top of the funnel in order to create it. So I think it's really useful for building that focus. And the biggest problem is without it, people just kid themselves. They just kid themselves. And my biggest pet hate is when I ask for the funnel metrics and they say they're in HubSpot. That's the killer. But it happens more often than you believe. Yeah, I can drive those funnel metrics from HubSpot. I'm like, as the CRO or head of sales, I want you that you should be falling asleep thinking about those numbers, not needing to pull them out of somewhere.
So when you're finding that there's clearly a hole in the funnel somewhere, is that where you guys have also developed that revenue school you're talking about earlier, that you'll come in and try and help them with that, or is that more at the front end?
No, I go back to the similar points I made earlier. If we didn't invest in companies unless they had a really defined funnel with all the metrics and it was singing and dancing, we'd never invest in anything. It'd be very hard because, especially at our intersection, that's usually the problem. That's usually the go-to-market setup is usually the bit they need help on. So we try and fix it. I would say, rather than use it as a. We'll look at it in diligence. We'll look at it and say, right, okay, like, can you give us your final and can we have a look at it? But the actual kind of fixing of it usually happens afterwards.
So speaking of due diligence, where do you think due diligence is mostly done wrong by investors? Are there any things you've learned in the last due diligence?
Great question. I'm not a big fan of psychometric testing. It probably goes back to my previous point around struggling with this idea that I'm going to make judgment calls from a questionnaire on whether this founder is going to be good or not. I don't. Rightfully or wrongfully, it just doesn't sit with me. So we don't tend to use them. We tend to use just talking to people that have worked with those founders and looking into that and seeing if we can get a feel for who they are, I think is better. Diligence is hard. I don't know. I'll throw the question back to you because I don't think I've got a really great answer for it in some respects, because often what we find is there is a confirmation bias to due diligence. You're just you've spent all this time with the founders, you've got the term sheet there, you're just like, please don't tell me there's anything wrong with this company, please don't tell me there's anything wrong with this company. And that one where the 10 instances of this software, we did the technical due diligence, and technical due diligence was like, you realize there's a lot of instances of this software. We then convinced ourselves that it would all be all right because this new version would be all singing, dancing, blah, blah, etc. So I think what I've learned from that is that you have to change your mindset away from, I really want to do this deal, to I really want to pour over this diligence, almost looking for the problems rather than the reasons to do it, because otherwise the confirmation bias just kicks in. We don't do this, but it would probably be better to go, right, deal team gets it to diligence, then there's another diligence team that comes in and actually scours the diligence to see, makes it their job to look at it with fresh eyes. That'd be really interesting. We don't do it, but I think it's an interesting
like the credit
idea.
department of a bank.
Yeah, somebody that's really annoying that just wants to be anal and make you angry, that sort of person. You need somebody like that can do it with a flannel on their head. And the other thing is, I'm like, I don't know if you guys ever do technical diligence, but I'm really struggling with, I think it's really interesting that technical people really love other technical people and they don't like to criticize other technical people. So if you get a technical DD provider to say, is that software any good? They almost always say it is. And there's a team set up, right? Yeah, it's fine. Because I think they're generally a warm bunch, the engineers, and they don't want to criticize each other or say, actually, no, that is part of crap built on sand. They just don't do it. I don't, yeah. So what am I saying? Probably what you could conclude from that is I'm not sure we've got diligence right yet. We keep trying to improve.
Yeah, it's a hard one. We took a company we were looking at into one of our other portfolio and probably didn't brief our portfolio founder all that well. When I asked the question with us all there, it's like, just what are the little things you'd look for? He then just went, wow, this is wrong and that's going to be a big problem. It's like, whoa, no. Let's do that after the meeting.
Ed, I've got a question around, I mean, with Octopus's brand, you're attracting a lot of Aussie and Kiwi companies and you've got a really good global reputation. Any common patterns you're seeing for companies that are scaling into the UK in terms of lessons learned, things they get wrong, things that they're getting right?
Yeah, I can't claim any credit for that. That's due to my colleague Adam Saeed, who is an Australian himself and has been working really hard to promote it. And we've obviously done a number of Australian companies now that are looking to use it, come over to the UK and expand into that market, and that's working well. I think, I don't know if this is a loaded question, Aaron, because I think that we both have a good lesson from our kind of combined investing, which is what works in Australia and New Zealand, say, is not going to work necessarily in the UK. It's a very different market. It's a bigger market. It's in some ways it can be less sophisticated, and in some ways it can be more. It's just, and you need to, I think the biggest thing is you need to spend time. And this is like, in all fairness, this is a mistake we've made in the past, which is we've not said to companies, spend time understanding this new market and let's build a real plan from people that have built similar businesses in this market. I think that's the most important thing, is to be patient. Again, if you get the money, you get the check, you got $5 million lands in your bank account, and you just hire 10 people in the UK, that's probably the wrong thing to do because you haven't yet done the real diligence. And actually now what we do much more is we work with people like Think and Grow and yourselves to go, okay, let's map out a real plan here for how we're going to attack this and think through the A/B testing of like what works, what doesn't. And in some ways I kick myself for the mistakes we made a little bit in the past, in that we already knew that from UK companies trying to get to the US, because there's an old adage is the US is where UK companies go to die, because the US is so much more expensive, it's so much bigger, it's so much hard to understand, it's culturally very different, and you get a £3-4 million UK business trying to go over to the US to expand, almost certainly it's going to have a massive effect on the UK business. And the UK business just isn't big enough to support the mistakes you're going to make in the US. And so when our companies are launching in the US, we're very deliberate about how you should go about doing it and the money you should spend and the testing you should do and how you should get your customers to, if possible, to bring you into that market rather than, or partners or etc. And so I think that we've learned a lot of those lessons. And now I say when we do try and bring an Australian, New Zealand company over to the UK, the first thing we do, a bit like I said before, is do nothing, hold on to the money, and now let's build a very clear strategy and do the work.
One of the things we've learned coming from the smaller markets of Australia and New Zealand, it can be a lot more sales-led because a smaller market means that you're generally two or three degrees separation from, I don't know someone, but I know someone who knows someone, and they then mistake that for marketing prowess. But actually it was network and relationship. And so we see very fast growth in that local market. And so, market product fit, clearly must have marketing and sales. Then they go to the much bigger market where there isn't that network and it's much larger. And it exposes that actually we don't have any marketing, lead gen, and we're trying to then sell in an environment where we don't have those relationships. That's been one of our, I guess, learnings of Jump.
It's definitely that. If you've got a small market, you have to sell your product to everybody. You get into a larger market, you've got to be more sector focused. You need to be focused on your message, and the why you versus all the competition that's going to be in the larger market has to be much, much clearer. Yeah, again, there is that. And I think we've seen that where you've taken an Australian company over to the UK and they're like, we just sell to everybody. So we can't do that. You need to really understand who your ICP is, who you're selling to, and why you win versus all the competition. And that's a very different mindset than just sell as much as you can because the market isn't big enough to do anything else.
Absolutely. Mindful of time, really appreciate the time you've given us. We haven't got through half the questions that we had written down on our call sheet.
I did warn you, Don. I said I'm a rambler.
This has been great.
Awesome. So what it means is that we're going to force you to come back again in the future. But this has been really great. Really appreciate it.
Oh, cheers, guys. It's been lovely to be on. As I said, I thought I'd made it when I was referenced, so I don't know what this is now.
And Jack,
this is crazy.
Photo that you can't see there of you, Jack's going to bring that so you can sign it.
Yeah. I'll get you a fresh copy, mate. Don't worry.
When we see you in June, we're going to be over there with our mission. We've got 30-something in our cohort this time, and I hope to at least see you.
I'm sure you're going to be in the Octopus offices doing stuff, aren't you? You're over in the Octopus offices.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have something scheduled there. We'll definitely see you. Yeah.
No, it'll be great.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye.